Good morning, everyone. Since I'm already working on this handsome gentleman today, I figured I'd show y'all how I color and render skin. Once you get your inking down, the first step we're going to do is set our base tones. For this character, we're going to be working with pale tones. And generally, whenever I do pale tones, I stay right around in this area. And the reason why I stay around in this area is because if you go too pale, it can sometimes make it very difficult to see any lighting or highlights. But of course, if you want a character that's very pale, go ahead and choose whatever color you'd like. Something else to consider whenever you're picking a base tone is the undertone of the skin. For this character, he has a little bit of a yellowish undertone, but if we push it just a little to the left, we can get our pinkish undertone. The undertone of the character is going to heavily affect the blush, shadows, and highlights. Once we get our undertone picked, we're going to start applying our blush. For the face, I'll block in the eyes and the nose, and I'll blend it up into the temple as well. Sometimes I'll also put blush in areas where there's typically shadows. Typically, I like to put blush in areas like the tips of the ears, the fingers, the elbows, the shoulders, and the chest. Once I have all of the blush blocked in, the next thing I'll do is I'll get a big soft eraser and I'll start erasing certain parts of the face. And the reason why I'm doing this is to give the face more form and more definition. You can do this in any area where the blush has been applied. Now that the blush is done, I'm going to start putting in the first layer shadows. Whenever you're applying your shadows, make sure you're keeping in mind of where your light source is. And even though shadows are used for a light source, they can also be used to convey shape and form. And don't be scared to use heavy shadows on your character. To make the shadows look less flat and to give more definition, we're going to go in with a big soft eraser and we're going to lightly erase in certain areas, and then we're going to use a smudge tool and blend it out. To create a light scattering effect, I'll avoid blending out the edge closest to the light source. Remember that whenever you're applying the shadows, you want to keep in mind of where the light source is, as well as how certain body parts overlap each other. Next, I'll use the eraser and I'll go in and slightly erase the edges to create rim lighting. Now that we've finished our first layer shadows, I'm going to create another layer over this one and I'm going to start putting in even darker shadows. For these shadows, we're only going to be putting them in areas where the light source doesn't hit. And we're also going to be using these to redefine our first layer shadows. Once you finish putting in all the deeper shadows, we're going to go ahead and make another layer and apply more shadows. Using a darker and slightly more muted tone, we're going to go in and we're going to apply these shadows in areas where the light doesn't hit as much. Once you have that layer of shadow done, you're going to make another layer and apply more shadows, this time in the area where the light hits the least. Once we have all of our shadows done, what we're going to do next is we're going to use a cool blue tone and we're going to go in and we're going to start adding in bounce light. This is going to help add more color as well as help cool down a lot of those heavily saturated tones. Once you have your bounce lights added, next we're going to add our highlights. Anytime I'm adding highlights to the face, I avoid using white as much as possible. And the reason why is because white has a tendency to really suck depth away from a picture. To help the highlights pop a little bit more, I'll go in with a reddish orange and I'll kind of slightly outline where all the highlights are. Now add your finishing touches and do any adjustments and you're done. I hope this helps, and as always, happy arting.